when I meant unleashed, I'm not meant just shooting the basketball every time. I meant like I think the game and I'm a creator on the court. You know what I mean? So if I got a voice to where I can, hey coach, I see this. You know what you think about this? Then it's like, oh, okay. Like somebody that trusts me, that believes in me, that understands me, that I'm just not I'm not a system player. I am a system.
This was one of the very first things that anybody said about the Clippers when James Harden was traded, and it came from James Harden himself. But when he said this, everybody lost their minds, and it's mainly because of how a lot of his past situations have ended. James Harden on the Rockets, not happy, forces a trade to Brooklyn. A year later, not happy, forces a trade to Philadelphia. A year later, not happy, forces a trade to the LA Clippers. And after his first few games in a Clipper uniform, this statement was looking absolutely laughable, and the move itself was looking atrocious. But after a few changes, after a few pickups, the Clippers now find themselves as one of the most dangerous teams in the Western Conference. After a road loss against the Golden State Warriors on November 30th, the Clippers have now won 16 of their last 19 games. And a big part of that is the fact that now their offense is running the best it ever has. And I don't want to give James Harden all the credit for that happening, but he deserves a lot of credit. Ever since Kawhi Leonard and Paul George went to the Clippers, year after year, they have had the same flaw that a lot of people have pointed out time and time again. They never had a true point guard or a true facilitator. Before James Harden, I would say that their best facilitator or their main facilitator, other than Kawhi Leonard and Paul George, was probably Reggie Jackson, which, I mean, he's fine, but in comparison to someone like James Harden or Russell Westbrook last season, before Harden got there, it's not the same. And so for those first few seasons, you had Kawhi Leonard and Paul George really handling a lot of the ball handling responsibilities and the playmaking responsibilities, which, I mean, they can do it, but that's not really the way to maximize this team. And as a result, their offense kind of turned into just taking turns for the last few seasons. And that works fine in the regular season when they're both playing because they are such good tough shot makers, but come playoff time, that's not gonna work. Enter James Harden into the lineup, who has been fantastic for this team through the first half of the season. I feel like a lot of people had some doubts about Harden after his playoff series last season in Philadelphia, but during that series, he had moments where, like, you could tell, like, the real James Harden is still in there somewhere. And this season, he's showing it. 17 points per game, 8 assists, 4 rebounds, and that is huge when you consider the fact that this is the least amount of shot attempts that he is taking since he was in OKC coming off the bench. He's taking 11 shots per game this season, but he's shooting almost 47% and 43% from 3 on 6 attempts per game, which is a career high. Combine that with the solid defense that he's been playing, over a steal per game, almost a block per game, and you have a crazy threat to take a lot of pressure off of your main scorers in Kawhi Leonard and Paul George, and even Norman Powell to an extent. And that's been the main reason of why this team is so good and why their offense has been working so well, is because you have to pay so much attention to James Harden. Kawhi Leonard and Paul George are getting a lot more open looks that they've been getting throughout the last few seasons. And so when you have them being able to get more of those open looks, and then you combine that with the fact that they are still taking and making the tough shots that we've seen from them throughout the last few seasons, that's how you get a team that has won 16 of their last 19 games. Throughout the last 15 games, the Clippers have the second best offense in the NBA behind only the Boston Celtics, with an offensive rating of 124.5. However, it is worth noting that while their defense isn't the greatest, they are still relatively average in the last 15 games. They're 17th in defensive rating in the last 17 games, but their offense has been so great that they currently hold the 6th best net rating in the NBA in the last 15 games, with a plus 7.6. And not only has their offense been spectacular the last 15 games, they are doing it extremely efficiently. The most efficient team in the league, as a matter of fact. Last 15 games, the Clippers have a true shooting percentage of 64.1%, which leads the NBA. And a big part of that is James Harden, but another huge part of that is the other stars, Kawhi Leonard and Paul George, who are actually playing basketball this season. Kawhi Leonard is coming back from a meniscus tear that he suffered late last season that forced him to miss the playoffs, and Paul George missed the last month or so of the season with a knee injury. And so having both of those dudes back and healthy, shocker, has been pretty fundamental in them playing so well also. But because they're playing so much, I think this is the best versions that we're seeing from them throughout this entire tenure. Paul George is having possibly his best season since his MVP campaign back in 2019, and Kawhi Leonard is actually back to playing the quality defense that we're expecting from him. Kawhi Leonard this season is averaging 24 points, shooting 52% from the field and 43% from three, and Paul George is averaging 23 points and shooting 46% from the field and shooting 41% from three. Also 92% at the free throw line. The Clippers this season have 4 players that can reliably hit over 40% of their threes. Those 4 players are Paul George, James Harden, Kawhi Leonard, and Norman Powell. By the way, the lowest percentage of those 4 guys is Paul George, who is 41%. And this goes back to the offense that we talked about earlier, because a big part of why they're shooting so well, especially from three, is the fact that they are generating so many open shots. The Clippers shoot about 33 3-pointers per game. Try saying that 5 times fast. But of those 33 3-pointers, 27 of them are open or wide open. They only shoot 5 to 6 contested threes per game. And by the way, they still hit those contested threes. They're shooting almost 40% on threes that are either tight or very tight, and 41% on wide open threes. This is not good for the league, obviously, in the way that not a lot of teams are gonna be able to do anything about this, because it's not just those 3 or 4 guys. Ivica Zubac has been having one of the best seasons of his career, also attributed to James Harden in their pick and rolls. Zoo is shooting 66% from the field. He is shooting 70% in the restricted area, 60% from 3 to 10 feet, so basically floater range. But here's where it gets crazy. He's shooting 67% from 10 to 16 feet. Now, given that is a extremely small sample size, but still. You have Daniel Tice, who they picked up mid-season after an injury to backup center Mason Plumlee, who has been very solid, unexpectedly, so far on this team. He's been a great 3-point shooter for this team, 44% on 1 attempt a game, 54% on 2-pointers, and he's been playing some solid defense. Another big factor of this turnaround has been moving Russell Westbrook to the bench, which has been pretty fundamental in this team actually playing up to their true potential. And while he has had a reduced role in some of the more recent games, he still provides that much needed energy that you need to run a bench unit. He's been pretty solid for this team ever since he got here, and that was evident by the fact that he took the Phoenix Suns to 6 games last year essentially by himself, because Kawhi Leonard and Paul George didn't play, in a series where he averaged almost 24 points. Like, you sort of knew that he was always going to be a pretty solid player for this team. The only problem was that teams don't really have to pay attention to him unless he's going downhill, which brings us back to the beginning, back to James Harden, because this move looked like the beginning of the end when it first happened. The Clippers were completely lost on what they actually wanted to do. They were losing to teams that they shouldn't have lost to, mainly the Memphis Grizzlies without Ja Morant, who are one of the worst teams in the league this season when he doesn't play, and it seemed like it was just too many people that could create. Now it seems like they have a much more streamlined offensive plan, and like I said, it's not even really just the fact that they are generating so many open shots. They have guys like Kawhi Leonard and Paul George that can create their own shot, and Norman Powell that can create their own shot. So once again, you have those 3 guys that can hit tough shots when needed, and now you're giving them a lot of open looks. Look, man, this is starting to get scary. I'm not gonna lie. And which is why I didn't really want to make a video when all of this first happened, because I wanted to see what changes they would make after that terrible start and how teams would react to those changes. Well, we are getting our answer. Teams have no idea what to do with this team because a lot of times it's literally too much to defend. And even if you play perfect defense, you'll just get a you shot from Kawhi or Paul George or James Harden. And so I don't know, man. This is probably gonna be one of the toughest teams in the NBA to beat. in the playoffs. And the thing to keep in mind when you think about playoffs with this team, the same thing I've said about Drew Holiday and the Celtics. While James Harden has had his shortcomings in the playoffs in the past, while Paul George has had his shortcomings in the playoffs in the past, they do not have the same type of roles or responsibility that they had when those shortcomings actually happened. Paul George has been consistently the number 1, number 2 guy. James Harden, consistently the number 1, number 2 guy. And while you still could make the case that they are still in that role on most nights, they now have Kawhi Leonard alongside them. So even if, say, Paul George has an off night, you have James Harden and Kawhi Leonard. If James Harden has an off night, you have Kawhi Leonard and Paul George. And even if James Harden, your main ball handler, is having an off night, you still need to respect him enough to actually guard him. And so even then, they're still gonna be creating a lot of open shots. This team is scary. I don't know what else to say. But of course, it is January. We will see what happens when that time comes, but as of right now, if a team's won 16 out of their last 19 games, I think it's time to start taking them very seriously. But with all that being said, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Subscribe if you're new, hit the bell to be notified when I upload, comment down below what you want to see next, and as always, I'll see you guys in the next one.